Hi everyone, today I'm going to help you make your standard exhaust system sound better and help you understand how to customize the sound. Obviously this is focusing on the Gransport, but the general rules will apply to most Crossplane V8s. So let's start by explaining what exhaust systems come with the car. There are two variations of the exhaust, the Euro 3 compliance system and the Euro 4 compliance system. You'll probably come across people referring to them as the US or the Euro system, but this gets very confusing very quickly since both systems were sold in both markets on both the 4200 and the Gransport at different points in time, so it isn't very useful for identifying which system you have. When Euro 3 was introduced, the big change was that the cars needed to be compliant from cold start and were not allowed to warm up. In the Euro 3 compliant cars, they achieved this by running a double-skinned header to get the cats hot as quickly as possible. In Euro 4, this requirement was extended, so they pushed the cat further into their headers to get them close to the exhaust ports, and this is the defining feature. You'll find that in a Euro 4 compliant car, you'll have the cat in the header. The good news for anyone wanting to modify their exhaust though is that the ECU will only see Euro 3 emissions requirements, so you won't need an aggressive cat system to defeat the secondary O2 sensors, but more on that later. The standard system is a set of headers, 4 cats, a center silencer, which in some cars is a silence crosspipe, and then finally some mufflers. The Gransport mufflers are a bimodal valve which is a straight pipe when opened. This should really give you an idea of how overmuffled the system is, that when the Gransport is in sports mode it does not sound like a straight piped car. Most of the muffling comes from the cats, with the Trofeo cars not even using a muffler and just silencing from the Euro 3 cats. There are two OEM headers. The Euro 4 is the one you don't want. These are unequal length and far too short for low revving engines in these cars. You may hear people say that Lamborghini mufflers or other aftermarket mufflers will drone, but the drone actually comes from the headers. The unequal length runners are the real culprit. Lamborghini make a set of headers to replace the Euro 4 headers. They fit straight in place and bolt directly in without disturbing the heat shielding, but this convenience comes at the price of them still being too short for the low revving engines that these cars come with. For this reason, the Euro 3 headers were my pick. They were as long as I could get without going into custom headers, and with the help of new model wreckers in Sydney, ask for Arvo, he is a super helpful guy, I got a set of headers for a couple $100 dues. The downside with them is that you need to remove the factory heat shield, but this isn't so much an issue with the headers being double skinned, and they also sit further off the engine. They do come quite close to the dry sump hose however, so I would suggest that you wrap or otherwise insulate the hose to protect the oil. The double skinning can also rattle, so it can't hurt to shore them up with some spot welds before installing. With the closest to being an ideal length, they will also give a much higher pitched sound, which is a sound that I prefer. The OEM Mid Section is actually an inline muffler. If you have a look inside, you can see that it is perforated with packing. These arrangements are super effective for removing all high pitched tones, so naturally I had to remove mine. My mid section is customized, running a long common section, effectively running my headers as an 8-2-1. I utilised this long common section to run a single Euro 3 compliant cat, and this is now running both O2 sensors. Due to the extra distance from the headers, I did need to wrap part of the exhaust to get the cat up to temperature, but since doing that I've had no check engine lights. By running such a long common section, I also cancel out a lot of the Crossplane Sound. This is made easier since the engine is kind of an even odd firing V8, which is a more evened firing order than a traditional American Crossplane V8. The E92 M3 uses a similar firing order, and this makes it a lot easier to fully eliminate the Crossplane Sound with longer common sections, or multiple X-pipes. It also has the benefit of reducing drone and overall cabin volume the longer the common section is, and as you make it longer you will get an overall higher pitched sound. The OEM mufflers are a chambered muffler with a restriction and perforations. This style of muffler is super effective at eliminating drone and all high-pitched noise. Most OEM mufflers will have 2 or 3 chambers, but the OEM Gransport muffler is a single chamber. With the valves open, you can see that the path is straight through, but as I've already shown you, you can barely hear anything as most of the muffling occurs before the muffler. However, even if you do change everything else and use the OEM mufflers, they're noticeably quieter than the Lamborghini mufflers. And that is entirely due to the perforations. It is a super effective way of removing high-pitched tones from the system, and this is why when my car revs compared to cars with the factory mufflers, it is such a sharper tone. When I originally installed the Lamborghini mufflers, I said, and in terms of volume, there's probably not much change now that I've got one on the car and had a chance to test it. But they do have a very different tone. Well, it turns out the reason for that is that the Lamborghini mufflers are straight through and unrestricted to the default tip. When you open the valve, you're not changing the volume, but the tone of the exhaust due to the change in path length. In order to address this, I ended up packing my muffler with steel wool. Ultimately, my exhaust sounds more like the difference between a sports car and a race car than boring and slightly less boring. So pretty happy with the result. So all in all, the exhaust on these cars can be modified quite easily. There is a lot more fun to have with the sound, and the parts aren't too expensive and are readily accessible. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where I will have a follow-up dyno and I'll discuss performance differences and what you should expect and why you shouldn't get too excited.